Welcome individuals of all creeds and beliefs. Today is Friday, today is the start of the weekend. We have to continue what we started yesterday, which is our review of specs for this patch. We started with tanks, so today is the healers day. We're going to go over all of the healers and we're gonna rate them out of 5 in different categories, in things that might be interesting to you if you're thinking about playing a healer, if you're wondering about how do they play. I was thinking about playing this healer, but how difficult it is. I was thinking about playing this healer, but how is it in Mythic Plus compared to the raid? How many abilities they have? How fast does it play? This is where we come into play with this review of healers. So much like tanks, we have divided them in some categories. Some of those will be quite similar to the tanks, like difficulty is still there, the damage of healers is still there, the APM, the speed at which they play is still there, the utility and the diversity is also still there. What changes for healers are 3 new categories to replace the ones for tanks: the AOE Healing Power they have, the Spot Healing Power they have, and the tankiness, how resistant, how self-sufficient and resilient they are to taking damage, which becomes increasingly important in Mythic Plus. The higher you go in keys, the more dangerous abilities become. It's quite important, it's quite valuable for a healer to be tanky. So we start of course with the difficulty, just to get things out of the way. We start with the dichotomy of priest, because we have holy with 1 star out of 5, and then we have discipline with 5 stars out of 5. Discipline is quite complex in how it works. So if you are a new healer, if you're thinking about playing a healer, I would advise against starting as a discipline priest. Luckily, priest also contains the easiest of the healer specs. So you can start as a holy priest and then maybe make your way up to discipline, because the way they play is much different. Discipline has a much more preemptive, much more proactive type of play. So they want to do their stuff before the damage comes in. They want to know when the damage is supposed to come in, so they can prepare 10 seconds ahead of time, so that when the damage comes in, they can land their absorb shields or their big burst healing of things like evangelism, for example. So it's quite complex in how it plays, so I wouldn't recommend it for first-time healers. Holy is the opposite. Holy is very straightforward, is very continuous in what they do. They have their 3-4 abilities they use every time when they are off cooldown, and then just continue to spam your heal. So it is quite straightforward as a spec. It's also nice that it's very meta right now, so it's pretty good. It's a pretty good combination, very meta plus very simple for beginners, so it's quite the nice entry-level spec for healers. After this divide in the priest class, we have the 2 stars out of 5 of difficulty of Resto Druid. Resto, because of the insane pace at which they spam rejuvenation and not much else, it is hard to make a case for Resto Druid to be quite difficult to play. It does become more difficult. It does have a taller ceiling in Mythic Plus. You can start to cut weave, you can start to old weave, it becomes more complex. You can finesse your way in Mythic Plus, but in general it's quite straightforward if you want to start as a healer. Then you have a middle ground. This is mostly up to preference, really. 3 stars out of 5 for Shaman, for Mistweaver, and for Holy Paladin. They do have their more complicated niches. For example, Shaman plays more similar to Discipline. Shaman wants to know what's happening before time, so they can start building up their Cloudburst, they can start prepping the big heals of perhaps things like Wellspring, or now with the tier set instant chain heals, etc, to then blow up the Cloudburst. So it's a mini discipline priest. Meanwhile, Holy Paladin and Mistweaver's difficulty comes from the fact that they are melee. So you will have to interface yourself with melee mechanics, which is not something healers do normally, especially if you are a ranged DPS thinking about healing. Going Shaman, going Druid, going Discipline will still let you play like a ranged, but going Paladin or Mistweaver will significantly change how you have to approach the encounters, the fights, even Mythic Plus keys, right? You're not used to dodging stuff that's in melee in Mythic Plus, so if you go for these type of melee healers, it is quite more complex, at the very least, the beginning. Once you get used to it, perhaps it goes back to being more simple, but at the start is quite the jump in difficulty for both Holy and Mistweaver. Then we have the difference of healers, much like the difference of tanks in how much they can solo heal themselves and how much damage they take. The difference for healers is in about how powerful is their AOE healing and how powerful is their spot healing. For those who don't know or are not quite aware, spot healing means how quickly can they react to a oh shit moment. You know, you are there chilling, doing damage in Mythic Plus, suddenly a melee DPS fails a mechanic and drops to 20% HP. What do you do? That is the spot healing. How great, how nice, how effective you are at dealing with that problem. Because that has nothing to do with AoE healing. AoE healing is, you know, dump all of your AoE stuff, your Light of Dawn, multiple Light of Dawns, perhaps things like Rejuvenation, Carpet Bombing, Wild Growth, everything on multiple players. But what about the single target healing in a pinch, very quickly? So when it comes to healing, of course, none of the healers is very weak. So I had to like shrink the gaps between healers. So I put Shaman and Holy Paladin at 3 stars out of 5, followed by Mistweaver and Discipline at 4 stars out of 5, and then Druid and Holy Priest at 5 stars out of 5. This is purely just by looking at the overall HPS in the raids, which is what you do in raids, very wide AoE healing. So Druids have a very easy way to carpet bomb the entire raid with HOTS. Holy Priests, of course, very consistent HPS healing. Discipline is much different. They have very little healing normally, and then they have gigantic bursts of healing, so it's quite different as well. This perhaps could warrant a second rating in Mythic Plus, because AoE healing in Mythic Plus is definitely not the same thing as AoE healing in the raid, but we're gonna leave it like this because we have the spot healing part. Spot healing, we have 5 stars out of 5 for Shaman and for Holy Paladin. Those are very good at just saving someone immediately. Shaman's mastery is literally made for healing people at low HP. They have been buffed at the start of Shadowlands with gigantic coefficients of spell power to their heals, in particular Healing Surge and Riptide. So their fast heals are now very massive in terms of healing, so they are the best at picking up someone who's about to die. Followed by Holy Paladin. The build currently of Holy Paladin with Light of the Martyr and of course their own Word of Glory makes it the second best because of the instant, the quickness they can have. Followed by Holy Priest and Mistweaver. They are not particularly quick. They're not slow either, but they're not that effective. And then you have the worst ones. You have Druid and Discipline. Discipline is just awful at spot healing. Is one of their major issues. It continues to be one in Shadowlands. And then Druid as well. Druid does have Swift Mend as a no shit button, but it has a cooldown, a significant cooldown. So after that, they don't have much besides spamming Regrowth, which is not very good in terms of spot healing. Then you have DPS. For healers, very important, particularly in Mythic Plus. So just by looking at the DPS in Mythic Plus, you have 5 stars out of 5, Shaman and Priest. Holy Priest are the 2 most damaging specs in Mythic Plus. Pretty much self-explanatory. If you're here because you're thinking about playing a healer, you might have done Mythic Plus keys with healers in your group, and you might have seen the damage differences of each of the healers. After those 2 specs, you have Resto Druid, quite rising recently in terms of effectiveness in Mythic Plus when it comes to damage as well. After that, you have Holy Paladin, giga nerfed over time, over multiple times, from their old Ventier damage. Now their damage is quite middling, 3 stars out of 5. Below them, you have Discipline Priest and Mistweaver. They are a 1 to 2 stars out of 5. Both of them have easily the lowest damage of all healers. And that's just how it is. It's always worth to remind everyone the irony of the 2 healers who are supposed to heal while doing damage. Mistweaver with Fist Weaving and Discipline with their damage rotation currently having the least and the worst damage of healers. That's quite funny or depressing depending on which spec you are playing. After this, you have the tankiness rating. This is more in-depth, this is more important in both raiding and Mythic Plus because of how safe you can be. With this rating you have Druid. Resto Druid is generally the tankiest of the specs. You have a very powerful conduit as a Druid. You have your own defensive, which is pretty good because it has only a 1 minute cooldown. You can go into bear form. You have the affinity for Guardian. You have another frenzied region to use if you go into bear form with Guardian affinity. So very, very tanky. Followed by Shaman. Shaman is also very tanky. They do have their own elemental to give them 30% max HP. They have one of the strongest consistent damage reduction cooldowns, Astral Shift. They do have the Ghost Wolf, which can give them 20% damage reduction. They can even double down and be Necrolord to make them even more defensive, so it's quite a sturdy spec. After these two, there is a significant gap, because Paladin and Mistweaver are both quite squishy. Not only are they squishy, but remember, they are also melee, which can put them more in danger than if they were ranged. Paladin has a terrible defensive, a 20% DR. That is perhaps the price they have to pay for having an immunity, for having Divine Shield. Don't be deceived. Just because Paladin has an immunity does not make them a tanky class or spec, because they are not. Same goes for Mistweaver, even worse actually, Mistweaver. They are quite squishy, their defensives are not very good, and they are melee. The worst, however, the worst is Priest. By a long margin, Priest is the squishiest of healers. You will hate your life in the raid every time you're gonna see those guys to the ground because their defensives are awful. They are the slowest of healers. It is just a bad mix for them trying to stay alive. It's quite rough. Then we have the APM. This is very simply how fast does it play. This might be also quite important for people who are thinking about playing healers. The fastest ones are Holy Paladin and Recto Druid. Holy Paladin, of course, being a melee spec that also has to do damage, they're also going to have to fill plenty of GCDs with damaging abilities, which makes it very fast. They don't cast, so not casting makes you very fast. If you're casting 10 spells with a 2-second cast, for 20 seconds you casted 10 spells. A Paladin will have casted 20 abilities in those 20 seconds, so they are very fast. Same goes for Druid. Because of the aforementioned spam of Rejuvenation, they are quite fast in how they play. Talking about the slowness, we have Holy Priest and Resto Shaman. They are the two specs that get to cast the most, the longest, the more abilities, so they do tend to be quite slow compared to the top healers we have just seen. In the mid though, you have Discipline and you have Mistweaver. They do have a mix of instant abilities and casted abilities. Mistweaver does also have to Fistweave, to use damaging abilities, instant damaging abilities to do damage and heal, which makes them decently fast. Same goes for Discipline. They do have a good amount, not like Mist of Pandaria days, but a good amount of Power War Shield spam, so the instant ability, so it is quite quick compared to Resto Shaman and Holy Priest. We do now have the last category, which is the utility. How much stuff do they have extra? Okay, take away their healing, take away their defensives, what's left? Shaman, of course, gets the 5-star rating for utility together with Druid. The two hybrid specs happen to have, of course, tons of stuff. Slows, stuns, snares, roots, sleeps, hex, interrupts, AOE stuns, Typhoon, Vortex, Combat Res, Bloodlust, a plethora of utility for these two specs by a large margin compared to the other healers but one, which is Mistweaver. We saw yesterday Brewmaster having tons of utility for tanks, so does Mistweaver. They do have quite the list of options they can have, not as much as Brewmaster. They do miss a few things, but they're still quite the resourceful healer when it comes to coming up with ways to help your party. In the middle you have Paladin, Holy Paladin, of course, same as Proth. You have Blessing of Protection, Blessing of Freedom, you have Sacrifice, you have Lay on Hands, so you can have quite the options of extra help for your friends. And lastly, at the bottom, once again, we have the Priests. Priests don't happen to have too much utility. They have Mind Soothe, which you will learn having their best use in a boss to get closer to him before pulling in a raid, and occasionally a few skips, like the Mists of Tyrnaseed skip right at the start perhaps, but besides that, not too much is gonna help with Mind Suit. You know, they have a grip, you know, a no scope 420 top gamer grip to save someone's life if he gets knocked off somewhere, maybe, but beyond that there is not too much. So with the overall look at healers, once again it is worth reminding everyone that many of these don't mean the healer is good or the healer is bad. For example, the difficulty is gonna be up to preference. Perhaps you do want an easy to play, an entry level healer like a priest, like a holy priest, or perhaps you want to challenge yourself. You're like, looking at this, apparently discipline is quite difficult and it's also very squishy. So I'm gonna take it up on the challenge and try to play discipline, right? So it's up to preference, much like the APM. The speed in which they play is gonna be up to preference. And then other things are just a matter of fact, like the DPS, or like how tanky you are, how safe you are in playing the spec, or things like the utility you have, or the type of healing you have. These are also things you can look at and decide if they interest you or not, if they are sparking your appetite for one of these specs as a healer. Much like I said about tanks yesterday, healers are quite in demand compared to DPS, so there is always time and room for new players joining the healer ranks. So you're more than welcome to join in and start trying to play one of these healers. With this said, and with me informing you of this recap for healers for 9.2.5's incoming rollout of alts, like myself, I have already started on Paladin. Eventually I will jump, I think, on Monk, but I will expand on that in a few days. With this done, as I said, it's time to leave each other once again on this Friday and weekend's start. Thank you guys, of course, for watching the video. You can help me, my channel, and my family, including my 4 children, with liking and commenting on the video, as well as subscribing to the channel. This one being a healer video, I'm gonna pull a 180 and surprise you. Only non-healers can subscribe to this channel. There you go, you didn't expect that. And then of course, I'm also available on Twitter in this general direction to follow me for whatever reason. Same, whatever reasons could be included for joining me and supporting me on Patreon somewhere in this direction. Doing so will let you enter my Discord channel, which is a thing. You know, it can happen if you support me on Patreon. With this being said, time to leave each other. Thank you guys again. See you guys soon. And in the meantime, oh my god, I started this video and I noticed this insect stuck inside my lights behind my monitors. It's been triggering me for 30 minutes. Now I'm getting you though, motherfucker.